I asked June Wetland about what the current state of the library is in terms of whether there's cuts or whether people are actually going to the library. I know within the local area there's not been much in the way of cuts to the service.
No, we've been very lucky, really, because I know that some local authorities have had lots of cuts, but I think libraries seem to remain a really important feature in this area, which we're really lucky with.
You're saying your job is to get people to come into the library. Do you see more and more people actually coming into the library?
I think there are more people coming into the library, yeah. I mean, numbers of people coming into the library are certainly not dropping, they're staying constant or sort of increasing.
You're listening to Summer Valley 97.5 FM. This hour we're looking into the function of libraries today within a culture of government cuts. After interviewing June Wetland and David Dixon, I was surprised that Baines libraries are in such good health despite the current financial climate. I think this is surprising because there's a lot of libraries having their hours cut or being closed down completely and handed over to communities. I decided to look into why some councils were so desperate to offload library services. I asked David Dixon his opinion on why some councils were so desperate to cut library services.
I think the library service for a lot of councils is a bit of an easy target because there are some things as a council you have to provide. You've got no choice, you have to do that. And there are some things which are discretionary, you don't have to provide. And so it's all very easy to cut back the things you don't have to provide and simply say to your public, well, we don't need to provide that service. And libraries, unfortunately, is one of those dead easy targets for councils.
I then put this question towards Lauren Smith from Voices for the Library. It seems that this has been an issue that's been going on for quite a while. I mean, even under the previous government, there seemed to be a lot of talk of libraries being shut.
Yeah, it's not a new problem. We've seen cuts in library budgets over the past 10 years, which means that library usage has gone down because they're not necessarily meeting the needs of communities anymore. There's been a lot of change in society and libraries haven't necessarily always been able to reflect these changes because of the budget restrictions that they've had, because it obviously takes a lot of work to explain to a council why they should be putting more money into libraries rather than taking it out, when a lot of people would argue very simplistically that, oh, look, people have access to the internet now, therefore libraries are redundant. This is obviously not at all the case, because a third of the population in the UK doesn't have access to the internet, let alone the fact that not all information on the internet is good and not all good information is on the internet. So libraries are very relevant, but yes, we have been seeing cuts over the past few years, which has then resulted in a decline in usage, not necessarily a decline in need, and closures now are the big issue because we've not seen closures on this scale ever.
You're tuned into Summer Valley 97.5 FM. In this programme we're looking into the state of libraries today. Somerset County Council has cut a quarter of their library funding, a move that's been controversial with some members of the public. I spoke to Christine Lawrence and asked her why were there so many cuts in changes to the library service.
We did a library review in August 2010. We started a library review which was done by Shared Intelligence. We were looking at how we are going to have a new vision for the library service. This also was impacted by the mid-term financial plan and the way we were going to fund libraries and all the other funding streams within the county council. This, of course, has been a very difficult time for county councils, and I'm sure you've heard Ken Maddox, our leader, speak many times about the cuts we're having to make, 75 million over 3 years.
Yeah, I've heard that all councils have to tighten their belts some way.
So we've been looking, and I've been looking at all the areas I've just spoken about as to how we can fund all those areas, and we look after a lot of older people. We currently look after and help and support 38,000 older people. So there are lots of things we have to do. We have to look at how we do them. Can we do them differently? And can we save some money in the process? And that also means libraries. So you can't just say, well, we'll do some areas but not others. You have to look at all the areas of spend and say, how can we move forward? That's why we came to the conclusion that we'd have to make some cuts in the library service, as well as all the other services that we can put together, and that goes across the board.
So do you think in recent years there's been a change in the public's need for a library service?
People really love the library service, and there will always be those that have used it regularly and will continue to do so. But of course, a lot of younger people tend to get their information maybe through Google and through using their computers. And not everybody has computers. Some people use the library computers, but lots of people do use their own information systems at home in order to find out the information they want. So it is about the balance of having enough libraries open so that people that need them can use them, bearing in mind that over years, maybe not so many people will come into libraries because they will want to use their own equipment at home to get the information that they need.
When I interviewed Lauren Smith, she mentioned about the cost of running a publicly funded library service, and this was her opinion.
I think councils have a duty to be funding a library service because they aren't that expensive. On average, it costs between, £15 and £18 in council tax per person per year to keep a library running. In the UK as a whole, it's about £1 billion a year, and it makes up a very, very small amount of the council's overall budget.
Later on, when I interviewed David Dixon and Christine Lawrence, I put this question towards both of them, and they gave very different answers. I've been talking to a lot of campaigners, and one of them reckoned that the amount that it actually costs to actually run a library system is publicly funded library system is a drop in the ocean in terms of taxpayers' money. Is that true?
It is. The biggest cost actually. If you look at kind of my whole remit, actually, as far as it sounds a lot, is when I mentioned earlier, I got street cleansing, I got waste, I got the libraries, I got sports, I got leisure, and community safety. That sounds a wide remit, but actually, in the big picture of what this council spends, I'm probably one of the smaller spending areas. And people, quite clearly think you pay your council tax to get some of those basic stuff done. Actually, as a percentage of what you pay council tax, all of what I cover, including the library service, is a very, very small percentage. Actually, most of that is around kind of social care, adult services.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people, like other councillors in Baines and campaigners who are trying to save the libraries, and a lot of them seem to think that libraries are reasonably cheap to fund.
No. They're not particularly cheap to fund. We spend just under £7 million a year on library service. We have a budget of £5.4 million, and then we also take in money from the use of DVD and fines. That brings us in another £1.3 million. So we have to bear that in mind. It's not necessarily cheap, but it's about getting the best value for money that we can.
When I interviewed Lauren Smith, I asked her about the claim that some people have made that councils have mismanaged taxpayers' money.
I do think some money is being spent rather unwisely, and I don't think it's being spent with a view to the future. What's important to realise is that communities aren't going anywhere, and the more you take resources out of them to put into high-profile central buildings, the more you are depriving those communities. You're taking away parts of their life that they can't replace. They can't go necessarily to the city centre and replicate what they would have been doing in a village in the city centre.
When I interviewed Catherine White, she's much more vocal on the subject, going as far to even give examples of how councils have mismanaged taxpayers' money. There's a lot of concern with libraries that when the land's sold off, you can't bring back the library.
Well, absolutely. And I think the other problem is that whilst local authorities are cutting hours and threatening to close libraries, while they are suggesting they do this, they're coming up with ridiculous non-jobs to employ people within these local authorities, such as, I think it's Norfolk, that have advertised and employed 543 diversity officers at a cost of £20 million. Now, why on earth would they need 543, well, across the UK, 543 diversity officers, for heaven's sakes? If people want to learn about diversity, the place to go is the local library. You do not need to employ people to, to spread the word of diversity in our communities when you can actually learn about diversity through books and writing and everything within our local libraries. That's £20 million out of taxpayers' money going to people who are called diversity officers. I just find this completely and utterly unacceptable. It is unacceptable to mismanage public funds. These people have been voted in for a short period of time, and they've been voted in to oversee the libraries, to ensure that services are kept up and provided in a sensible and economical way. And they're doing exactly the opposite.